The Callisto Protocol finally came out today. I have been waiting for this game for so long. I consider this game to be the first game in what I'm calling the new survival horror wave that is about to hit us as gamers. The Callisto Protocol this month, and then Dead Space Remake next month, and then Resident Evil 4 Remake, Alan Wake 2, the new Silent Hill games, the new Alone in the Dark game, all the new asymmetrical horror games. Horror gaming is going to have a huge influx really soon, and I cannot wait. I went to my local gaming store and I bought this as soon as the doors opened, and I just spent the last few hours playing it, and I'm about to give you my first impressions to this game. This isn't a review of the whole entire game, it's just my first impressions on the first few hours. I'm about to show you some gameplay and give you my first thoughts on that, but before I do, obviously consider subscribing. I love survival horror gaming, and I talk about it quite a bit on this page. You should check out my gaming playlist. I have tons of Resident Evil videos, I have some Silent Hill videos, I have a video I just uploaded, the top 5 horror games coming in 2023. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you where, but this was pretty high on that list. I know it came out in 2022, but it's the end of the year. It can count towards next year. And also consider subscribing, because this is just part 1 of a 2-part review. My first part is going to be this first impressions video, and then my second part is going to be a final thoughts video that I'm going to make once I beat the game. And like I mentioned before, I talk about survival horror gaming a lot, so there's a very good chance that I'm going to make more videos on the Callisto Protocol, and I'm going to review Dead Space Remake when that comes out. And one video I know that I'm going to do for sure is Callisto Protocol versus the Dead Space Remake. But anyway, enough talking. Let's get into the video. I'm gonna break this video up into pros and cons. And my first pro is, I feel like, the obvious thing that I feel like everyone knew was gonna be the case, and that is the cast. The cast in this game already is phenomenal. All the performances all the way around are so incredibly engaging, and it makes me really like these characters. The main character, played by Josh Duhamel, is amazing. Already one of my favorite survival horror protagonists, especially in recent years. And he's surrounded by some really good supporting characters, which I'm also very thankful for. When I grew up playing survival horror games, I was always obsessed with the side characters. The supporting cast was always my favorite. Like, for example, in the very first Resident Evil game, I knew the backstory and the bio of every single member of the STARS team, and I cared if they lived or died. And it's very rare these days that I feel that way towards any new survival horror games, if I'm being completely honest with you. A lot of side characters just feel like cannon fodder, just voices over radios giving you objectives there to be plot devices, and then they die, and then I forget they exist immediately after. But with this game, again, I'm only a few hours in, but I'm already really loving the characters, and that is because of the performances. Sam Witwer is in this game, by the way. I don't know if you know who Sam Witwer is, but he was in The Mist, a movie that I really love, and he's the voice of Darth Maul and a lot of Star Wars projects. I had no idea he was in this, and he plays a character that I've seen just a few times already, but already an incredibly engaging and memorable character. And the plot I find to be pretty good so far. It has a very strong start, and I'm gonna talk about the plot very briefly. I'm not really gonna spoil anything. Again, I am only a few hours into it, but I'm gonna give you the basic setup. So if you don't even want to know the setup, the first, I'd say maybe 30 minutes of story that this game has to offer, skip ahead probably 30 seconds in this video. But Josh Duhamel plays a character named Jacob Lee, and he is a pilot of a cargo ship that crash lands on Callisto. And he has no idea why, but he's immediately arrested and brought to the Black Iron prison. And then when he wakes up in his jail cell, he doesn't even have time to settle in. There is now an outbreak, the building is being destroyed, there's fires everywhere, prisoners are killing each other, and there's these monster alien things running all around the facility fucking shit up. And that is the basic setup of this game's plot. Again, I'm not too far into it, but that's pretty much all I know. I know some other things that I'm not really going to talk about yet, but again, very great start to the game's plot, and it's really enough to really keep me going. Now I'm going to talk about just overall gameplay and combat, and I'm going to be honest with you, at first it feels very clunky. The camera is zoomed in quite a bit to the main character. It is from a third-person perspective, but you don't really get to see around you. You don't get to really see the areas around you as much as other survival horror games like, say, Resident Evil 2 Remake or Resident Evil 3 Remake or another third-person game that just came out, God of War Ragnarok. Despite the fact that it's third-person, your vision is very limited, and that mixed with being in very claustrophobic environments, very narrow hallways, very small rooms, and then those small rooms and those narrow hallways are filled with clutter, it can make the game feel very clunky at first. It can be a bit frustrating, but once you play it for a good half hour, an hour, you get really used to it and it just feels good. It feels good. In the melee combat, there's quite a bit of it in this game, and at first it does feel a bit clunky. Don't get me wrong, the weapons have a punch. It feels very meaty. When you're fighting enemies with your melee weapons, it kind of reminds me, honestly, of The Last of Us and how good and punchy the melee combat in that game feels. Is it as good as The Last of Us? No, obviously not, but it reminds me of The Last of Us, and that is a good thing. And the melee combat is really fun when you learn to time your attacks with your dodges. Again, it can feel clunky at first. It can kind of feel like the game is working against you. But once you really know how to time your attacks and time your dodges, and you know how the gameplay loop is supposed to be, it feels really, really fun, and I'm really enjoying it. You do have guns in this game as well, or at least in my case, one gun. I've only found one so far, and the shooting feels really, really nice as well. It's so cool seeing the animations when you're shooting the gun, tearing apart the enemies. And you also get this other item called the grip. I haven't used it a lot, so I can't give you my full thoughts on it, but it's really, really cool. You essentially get to grab an enemy and hold them in place and push them forward, or, do whatever. In your grip, your melee weapons and your firearms all have upgrades. And I haven't upgraded my weapons that much yet, but I have looked through the upgrade bench and I am so excited. The upgrades look really, really cool. It looks like there's quite a bit of them, and it looks like it's going to be a fun way to make the gameplay change up and not feel stale. I'm playing this game on the PlayStation 5, and I absolutely love the amount of attention that was giving to the DualSense controller. The haptic feedback and the adaptive triggers is just so amazing, and I'm really, really glad that this studio put this much thought into the DualSense controller, because you don't really get that a lot from third-party games. There's just so many different feelings coming from the DualSense controller, and it honestly might be the most impressive game I've played in terms of how it utilizes that DualSense controller. It rivals Returnal. Returnal might be the best, but it does rival that, and in my opinion, it does DualSense stuff and haptic feedback stuff better than God of War Ragnarok, believe it or not. And again, I'm just really happy that that is the case, because a lot of third-party games either completely ignore the DualSense controller or just do the very bare minimum. And another thing that I'm very glad to say is that this game is not a Dead Space clone. The director of this game was one of the lead minds behind the Dead Space game, the original Dead Space game, a game that I really, really love. And a lot of people thought when this game was coming out that it was just gonna, feel like Dead Space with a reskin, maybe a few things changed, and I really do not think that is the case. Obviously, it reminds me of Dead Space in some regards. Some of the art design, some of the atmosphere, some of the environments, that sort of thing, but it really does stand tall on its own as its own entity, its own game. It honestly kind of reminds me of The Evil Within. The Evil Within is one of my favorite survival horror games of all time, and it was directed by Shinji Mikami, who was one of the main minds behind a lot of the original Resident Evil games, and he was the director of one of my favorite games of all time, Resident Evil 4. And The Evil Within doesn't feel like a Resident Evil ripoff. It really, really doesn't. It feels like it's its own game, its own entity. It has its own place on all survival horror gaming shelves. Obviously, it takes some inspiration and it takes some things from the Resident Evil franchise, but at the end of the day, no doubt it is its own thing. And I think that that is the exact same thing that's going on with Callisto Protocol here. Yes, it feels like Dead Space every now and then. Yeah, it borrows some elements from that, and it clearly is inspired by it in a lot of ways, but there are more things about it that feel unique. At the end of the day, it feels like its own unique game and its own unique experience. If I had to give this game a couple flaws, one of them would be that it does need some polish. I've heard that this game is running like absolute shit on PC, so I apologize and I feel bad for all the PC gamers out there. Luckily, I'm playing it on PS5 and it is running fine for me. You know what I mean? It's not ruining the experience. It clearly could use some polish here and there. The frame rates feel a bit low, but you know, it could use some fine tuning. One decent patch, I think, will fix this game a lot. Like, the lighting can be a bit janky every now and then. Like fire in this game, for example, there's a lot of fire in the prison that you see, and fire honestly looks kind of bad. And another nitpick I have about this game is I've really yet to be scared. It's a survival horror game, and it hasn't really scared me yet. There were some frightening moments, but not nearly as much as I would have liked. Now, granted, whenever I watched gameplay for this game or saw a trailer, I never thought it was gonna be, you know, like Dead Space levels of horror, or even like Resident Evil 7 Biohazard or Outlast levels of horror. But I'd still like for it to be more scary than it is. And now keep in mind, I am only a few hours into it, and I do 100% believe that it has the potential to get horrifying as the plot in the game progresses. It is spooky though, I will say that. I won't say it's scary, I will say it's spooky. The sound design is amazing, and the environments, the locations that I've visited so far, really, really creepy. Also, if you haven't played this game yet, just make sure you look in every nook and cranny, because there's no map yet. Again, I'm a few hours into this game, and I've yet to find a map. I really, really hope there is one in this game, and I really hope that I didn't miss one. I hope we get a map later. But as of now, I've yet to find a map, so it is easy to miss things. And there are some rooms that lead into bigger spaces that are completely missable. Like, if you don't check every nook and cranny, you could miss out on a really cool audio recording or a really cool room that adds to the lore and adds to the overall plot that you would otherwise miss. So just make sure you check out everything. But at the end of the day, I'm absolutely loving this game so far. It has an incredibly strong start, and as soon as I'm done editing this video, as soon as it's done uploading, I'm turning my PS5 on and I'm jumping right back in, and I can't wait. And I haven't felt this way about a game in a really, really, really long time. And I will say, based off of this first few hours of gameplay, this game has a very realistic possibility of being my personal favorite game of the year. Once again, this is just part one of my review, my first impressions video. When I beat the game, I'm going to be releasing a final thoughts video, and there's a very realistic possibility that there'll be more videos in between. Well, there you go. That's my quick and brief thoughts, my first impressions on the Callisto Protocol so far. What did you think? Do you agree with me? Have you played the game yet, or are you waiting to play it, or do you have no interest in playing this game? Again, consider subscribing, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.